Welcome to Open Up the Workforce, a show where we speak with executives driving diversity, equity, and inclusion in the future of work. I'm your host, Ava Sadeghi, co-founder and CEO at Symba. I'm joined by Donald.Knight, Chief People Officer at Greenhouse. I'm personally a huge fan of Donald and believe he's a leader in so many regards. Donald is a strategic HR executive with over 14 years of experience leading people strategies with a focus on hiring, nurturing, optimizing talent at a global scale, and even in the work they do to drive technologies at Greenhouse. Donald, thanks for being here today. And would you please tell our listeners more about yourself and your career story?
Absolutely. First and foremost, Ava, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to chat with you. I would say the first two things I would say is I'm Dalen's dad. And that's important for me because I think so many people right now are trying to figure out what does work-life integration look like. And so I try to lead with that for any of the folks that are still trying to find that balance. And then second, I'm a huge ice cream enthusiast. I absolutely love ice cream. And right now, my favorite flavor is pancakes and waffles by Jenny's. It's pretty amazing. But when I'm not focused on my dad duties or eating ice cream, I have the honor of being the Chief People Officer for Greenhouse Software. And Greenhouse is an amazing hiring software. I believe it's the greatest hiring software on the planet because it focuses on how do you mitigate bias in the hiring process. And that's super important because if you are able to attract diverse people to your organization and make sure that they have a fair and equitable process, then they can get to your organization and unlock tons of potential for the business. So that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you for sharing. And I love Jenny's ice cream myself. And I think it's really interesting and fascinating. That's why we're so excited to speak with you as Chief People Officer of an organization that has a product that advances this. So we'd love to hear how Greenhouse has taken steps to advance D&I and what results you've seen so far.
Absolutely. It's funny you asked that question. Recently, one of our co-founders, I call him Strauss with the sauce. His name is John Strauss. He was talking about this concept of the social impact that we're able to make in the space. So I'll nerd out with you for a few seconds. The first one is, we were the first software that introduced pronunciation. So when people join an interview process, that you can actually say their name correctly. Now, I recognize your name is Ava, and I'm confident people have butchered that name before. And so why is that important? Well, studies show that when you're able to create a best first impression by calling people by their actual name, that it actually lowers things like stress and anxiety during a process, like an interview that's already somewhat creating angst for the candidate. The other thing that we've done that I think is pretty amazing is the use of pronouns. And we have specific feedback from customers who have said, hey, like I have felt seen, valued, and heard because you're using my pronouns in the interview process, which just makes for, again, greater impressions. So those are some of the things I'm seeing other companies copycat, if you will. And that's not a bad thing. We actually relish in the moment that we're able to lead in that regard and then watch other companies cross that chasm. Me personally, what I get excited about, like we have onboarding, we have Greenhouse recruiting, structured hiring, which helps mitigate bias. All those things are amazing. But me personally, I'm a little biased to sourcing automation, which is this idea that if companies want to cast a wider net to diverse candidates, we've developed what are the Boolean strings that you should use? What are the keywords in organizations to go find them? And the reason that's important is because we had diverse people working on that product, to include our head of product, Henry Tsai, who's a phenomenal Asian American based out of the greater San Francisco area. And the guy who actually developed that software first works for a company named Steve. Steve is also Asian American. So why am I so hype about that particular product? Well, that's how Greenhouse found me. And I don't take it lightly as the first African American to sit inside of our executive leadership team. And I've seen our representation numbers increase tremendously, to include doubling how many women sit inside of our executive leadership team, to include more diverse candidates applying to come to park their time, talent, and treasure at Greenhouse. And so I know that representation is important. And so I'm both humbled and flattered that one of the products was used to find me, and we continue to use those products to find other diverse people as well.
That's incredibly powerful. And I think that the notion of making sure that you have diverse leaders building these products is so important. And we embrace that too. We have a woman of color CTO at Symba, and it really has been so powerful for the types of products that you create and how it impacts the community, but also the work that you're doing internally. And so I'd love to get a little bit more about the culture and how you've been able to retain this talent. You talked about how you're able to bring them in, which is incredible. How are you able to keep them excited to stay at Greenhouse?
Ava, oh my goodness. I wish more people would focus on that soundbite. So we need to figure out, how do we amplify that in shared spaces? I think one of the struggles companies have today is that they hire diverse people and then they're unable to retain them. And the reason why is because in many ways, those environments have not been tailored to nurture the culture. And what do I mean by that? Culture happens every day. Not one person is responsible for it. We all are. And so we have to find ways to build inclusive behaviors. So at our company, one of the easiest ways for us to nurture that culture and retain amazing talent is we shifted away from DE&I. And I know people are probably going to look at this and they're going to see my picture and they're going to be like, oh my God, this Black guy is saying we're getting away from DE&I. But the reason why is because we believe inclusion is an output. So inclusion happens when diversity, equity, and allyship is present. And so we've been focused on allyship behaviors. And in many cases, none of us were able to choose where we landed on the planet. Additionally, none of us got to choose our avatar. And so some people have been exposed to allyship behaviors, and others, at no fault of their own, they have not. And so what better place than the workplace, where people spend 90,000 hours, believe it or not, before they retire, the average person works 90,000 hours, which equates to about a third of their life. Imagine if we took a third of their life and taught them these behaviors in the workplace, then they would also then be able to go impact positively in their community. So all of our experiences, we built a people experience team for the first time last year. All of the events that they throw are intentionally helping people develop those allyship behaviors across this allyship continuum. And so what we focus on is not only just to be inclusive or invite people, but we also recognize you have to engage people, you have to empower them, and then you have to be in a position to champion them. And so if you sit in one of our all company meetings, which typically happen the third week of the month, you will see there's a whole segment in our all company meetings that are focused on inclusive behaviors. And we give people tips, almost like an infomercial in the middle of the meeting to teach people those behaviors. And so what I have found is by prioritizing that, people become seen, valued, and heard. And one of our newest arbors, that's what we call our ERGs, arbors. One of the newest ones is called Trellis, which is focused on people with disabilities. And when I see them talk about the power of seeing captions in our meetings, or they talk about some of the inclusive language that we're using in Slack, honestly, it really warms my heart, because it lets me know that we really are shifting people's habits, action, and behaviors. And I believe that's ultimately what helps us retain and nurture the culture that we fostered here at Greenhouse.
Absolutely. And this notion of allyship that you're focused on creates so much more of an inclusive culture around D&I, because I think that people know how they can participate and how they can be active. Can you give me maybe some examples of those tips that you share?
Absolutely. I'll give you one easy one. Shout outs to our Chief Fun Officer, who's our CFO. Her name is Christina. One of the things that she helped us learn was not starting meetings saying, hey guys, because there's typically not just all guys on the meeting. And so we don't want to be dismissive to other genders. And so shout outs to her for helping us with that. How we helped some men learn that is by starting meetings saying, "Hey, ladies." And it comes across jokingly, but believe it or not, it helps subconsciously teach people to be more mindful of the audience. So that's the first one. We've even taught people when they're entering Slack channels to also be mindful of how do they use certain language, because it may not resonate with others, or it may have a different meaning, because we have a huge presence in EMEA, particularly in Dublin. And so some of the things that we say here in America doesn't necessarily resonate there. And we have 20 employees in Canada, and it may not resonate there. So just being mindful of those things. And then the last thing I would say is people learn differently. So we record meetings. We make sure that we share the text. We turn on captions. We record the script. Some people learn better by reading as opposed to visual. Some people are visually impaired. So how do you curate this environment by changing those behaviors? And we found them to be subtle at first, but the impact over time when you have 800 plus employees is just immense. So that's just a few examples that we've used in the past to help people.
I would agree, and I'm taking notes here too. And I appreciate the beginning when you had talked about pronunciation, because my name, as you mentioned, is very unique, and we have very unique names at our team at Symba in general. We represent a lot of different cultures and backgrounds. And part of this is leading by examples. I think that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging and allyship, I think there's a really powerful community coming together and sharing resources and educating others. So how are you sharing these resources with others and leading by example? How are they learning from you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, there's so many different places I can point to. I think the first thing I would say is we're very big on data at Greenhouse. And so when you look at things like our candidate reports or our CEO reports, we share that out publicly in shared spaces. So folks can learn from the feedback that we're receiving from candidates, whether it's around culture and making sure you're not catfishing people by speaking about your values in one way, but not living them out. We have found that to be successful in helping people, even customers of Greenhouse, be mindful. I would say the second thing that we do is we're very big on thought leadership. And so often, I don't know if a week goes by where there's not at least one greenie. That's what we call employees at Greenhouse. There's absolutely at least one greenie somewhere in the world, on the planet, sharing some level of thought leadership on somebody's stage or podcast, or town hall or dinner meeting or breakfast meeting. And the idea there is because we recognize the social impact we can have. Now, with that said, we also recognize that the biggest room in the world is the room for improvement. And so we openly share, particularly Jamie Adasi, our head of IDEA, she openly shares, look, this has been a journey. Like if you come to Greenhouse 3 years ago, 5 years ago, we were still working out many of the things that we're good at today. And I'm confident if you show up at Greenhouse 3 to 5 years from now, we'll be even better at the things that we're trying to work out today and tomorrow. So we try to lead with that level of transparency, so they know that we're constantly improving, but we recognize that there is room to improve. And I think that's really what resonates with our employees and with many of our customers.
Absolutely. And I believe that that type of attitude and that approach in general keeps us humble and keeps us constantly learning. So we also try to embrace that too, and almost this notion, I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right and learn and grow. We know at Greenhouse you have a global culture, and you gave some examples around how you approach employees in Canada versus those in different countries. Can you speak a little bit more to that and how you've been able to preserve that inclusive culture as you scaled globally?
Yeah, I think it's this idea of celebrating our differences. Like, I try to always reverse engineer things just because I took a number of engineering classes in life. And so diversity drives creativity. When you have diversity of thought, you're naturally going to be more creative. What my CEO and I say is, if you and I always agree, one of us is not needed. So we believe diversity drives creativity. Creativity then drives innovation. Innovation drives revenue. Revenue drives profit. And so for companies that say, hey, Don, like all of this allyship talk and inclusion, diversity, equity, and allyship talk seems like mushy or soft, I'll say, look, let's just focus on the business metrics. Studies show that the more diverse your company is, more profitable it is. It also shows that the more diversity that you have, the longer or more successful your company will be around. And so I think by looking at the different regions and where we employ people, by celebrating their differences, it allows them to truly be their most authentic self at Greenhouse. And I'll take it a step further. We've had people in the middle of the pandemic who have wanted to culturally immerse themselves in different cultures that they have not grown up in. One of the ways that we've helped facilitate that is through this program we launched called Global Passport that allows any greenie to go to an approved country. We say approved country because we don't want to put them in harm's way. But they can go to an approved country for up to 60 days and they don't have to take PTO. And believe it or not, our head of talent planning and acquisition, she's already been to Belize. She was the first one. She went the second week of January. We also had our lead employment counsel attorney. She's actually spending time right now in South America, in Colombia, brushing up on all of her Spanish, eating some of the most amazing food on the planet. And what I believe happens is when we create these pathways for people to immerse themselves in other cultures, their appreciation and respect for other cultures also increases, which thusly allows us to retain diverse people because we have so many cultures inside of Greenhouse, over 15 nationalities. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. And I hope that we will continue to nurture programs that have that kind of foundational impact on our everyday lives.
That's an amazing initiative. It makes me want to do one of those exchanges. Do you have one in mind when you're going to do yours?
Oh, absolutely, Ava. Oh my goodness, I'm so glad you asked this. So my sister-in-law is Greek. She's from the second largest city in Greece, Thessaloniki. And so I've been to Greece before. We spent 2 weeks there. I absolutely loved it, but I really didn't get to learn Greek traditions. I want to learn. So this year, my global passport will be spent in Greece, and I'm going to go there for no less than 3 weeks, starting this summer. And I look forward to reporting back to you on if I'm a little bit better on making authentic tzatziki sauce and trying to figure out just other ways that I can just celebrate and learn more about Greek culture. Because now I have a nephew who is Greek named Alexandros. And I look forward to being able to connect with him in meaningful ways and tell him how much I know about this other part of his life that makes him who he is. So yeah, it's gonna be cool.
Thanks for sharing, Don. I will share that it was just recently Persian New Year, and our team had celebrated that, and we've done a lot of socials in our virtual setting where different team members will celebrate their culture and educate our team on why certain things are important to them and how they celebrate them authentically. So I really appreciate that you do that at Greenhouse.
Oh, absolutely. We even do a Heritage Month spotlight. So each month, if there's a certain culture that's being celebrated, we will actually bring that up in open forum. So it's pretty cool, and we spotlight it. We do a whole social campaign around it internally, so folks can really be able to celebrate the different walks of life that are here. So I'm glad that you all do that too. That's amazing.
Yes, and I know you mentioned the diversity that you have at leadership at Greenhouse. I'd love to get your perspective on how you're embracing diversity within early careers at Greenhouse.
Absolutely. I think the easiest way to celebrate it, diversity in early careers, is if they're able to see representation on their boards and in the executive leadership team. So I'm excited. 44% of our executive leadership team is made up of amazing women. Just if I had a little girl, I would make sure she spent time with all 4 of them because they're truly, truly impactful human beings. And then when you look at our board is the same way. We have 3 women out of the 7 people on our board that are women. And why do I call that out? It's because I have found it easier to want to go park my own time, talent, and treasure in organizations where I can see them living out inclusive behaviors through representation. And so what does that look like for our folks deeper in the organization, what I call experts or even managers? We have pretty exciting workforce diversity goals where we want people to see the growth of Greenhouse. We want them to see us evolving in representation. And probably the greatest testament happened recently where my head of TP&A, Ariana Moon, she says to me, I can go back and look at our candidate pipeline over the last 3 years, and I can see how diversity at each level has increased tremendously. And the more diverse our leadership becomes, the more diverse our candidate pipeline becomes. And so I'm pretty excited about that. We're also very intentional about making sure that we're in those spaces where we can tap into those diverse talent pipelines. So Afrotech, where you can find a lot of Blacks in tech, or Out in Tech, where we can find a lot of members in the LGBTQ plus community. We're intentional in being in those spaces because we want them to be here at Greenhouse. So yeah, that's typically how we're diversifying that pipeline, and we'll continue to do so.
Those are such powerful examples, and I appreciate you for sharing more. And as we wrap up the interview, we always ask the question, as a Tech for Good company, our whole mission at Symba is to hashtag open up the workforce. And to us, that means creating a future of work that supports equitable access to jobs and wealth creation. So we'd love to hear from you, Don. What are the next steps that leaders need to take in order to open up the workforce?
Oh, absolutely. This is great. And I'm glad, Ava, that you focus on wealth creation. It's not enough just to be able to make sure people have access to thriving jobs. We also have to be very intentional in how we educate them on financial literacy. And I'm really passionate about this because one of the easiest ways to shift the conversation around wealth creation, particularly at companies, is stop reserving long-term incentive or equity for only leaders. I'm excited to say 100% of Greenhouse has equity in Greenhouse, which is not the norm yet. I hope that shifts. I hope we continue to see amazing leaders like you help lead that conversation. So I think on the hiring side, Greenhouse is helping facilitate the conversation on how do you get access to diverse groups to these types of careers, and how do you make sure that the hiring process is not flooded with bias so folks with diverse backgrounds can find themselves in these types of careers. So we're facilitating that on the front end as hiring software. And for folks that are looking to figure out what that looks like, feel free to reach out to me. Like Ava, we can make sure we give them access to my contact information. But the other thing that we're doing is we're also leading by example. And so I know other CPOs that call me and say, hey, Don, how do you do equity for everybody? What does that look like? What does that look like from a financial literacy perspective? How do you teach them about EBITDA? How do you teach them about annual recurring revenue? How do you teach them about P&L? And what my hope is that as we continue to increase the access to these types of careers, we will also start to increase financial literacy and increase wealth creation by treating everyone equitably and allowing them an opportunity to not only contribute to our financial success, but also take part in our financial success. So I'm pretty excited about the future of work, and I'm pretty excited about Greenhouse.
Thank you, Don. That was so powerful for our audience, and I appreciate you for being open to connecting and sharing more. You are truly a pioneer in that sense of creating, in so many ways, diversity and inclusion and access internally in your company, but also being a leader in your space through technology and as a thought leader. So we really appreciate you for being here with us today. And before we wrap up, I want to give you the platform if there's anything else you'd like to share.
The only thing I would say is, Ava, thank you for creating these types of platforms for these types of conversations. I recognize that women are becoming way more educated than men. This is the first time in the history of the planet that women are actually way more educated than men, like formally. And so we will continue to see entrepreneurs, executives, and CEOs that look like you. And I'm confident that we will continue to find ways to create more meaningful impact as we see greater women representation. So thank you for creating this platform. Anything I can do to amplify your success, I'm happy to do so. And the only thing I would leave for the audience is find ways to champion amazing women. That's what's missing. Like, if we do that right, the rest of the world will be a lot better. So I hope to be a cheerleader and an active ally in that regard. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. You truly are in so many ways. I can't say thank you enough.
Thank you.